In the Western conception, the religion of Islam often begins and ends in the arid deserts of the Middle East. Despite this, in the modern era, the nation with the single highest population of Muslims in the world is not Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, or Egypt. Instead, the largest Islamic country on earth is a steamy land of tropical jungles, terraced rice fields, and blistering monsoon wind, located over 7,500 miles away from the land of Islam's birth. Deep in the maritime heart of Southeast Asia, the island nation of Indonesia is home to over 279 million people, 86% of whom are Muslim. Islam is a religion that was famously spread by the sword, yet the armies of the caliphate that carried the faith from Spain to Pakistan never stepped foot on Indonesian soil. This begs the question, how did a tropical archipelago traditionally dominated by Hindu-Buddhist kings become the most populous Muslim-majority nation on earth? The historical background. To properly contextualize how Islam reigned supreme in Indonesia, we must first provide a brief survey of the region's history prior to its arrival. The modern country of Indonesia is part of a wider political-geographical region, known as the Nusantara Archipelago, a massive chain of over 17,000 islands, stretched out over 5,000 kilometers of ocean. Nusantara is home to over 300 unique peoples, with their own culture and language, most of whom belong to the Austronesian ethno-linguistic group. The Austronesians were prehistoric humanity's greatest seafarers, arriving upon the tropical islands of Southeast Asia aboard sturdy catamaran and outrigger canoes over 3,500 years ago, as part of a multi-millennia migration that began on Taiwan a millennia earlier and ended on the islands of Polynesia 2 millennia later. Throughout the medieval era, the Austronesian peoples of Nusantara channeled the seafaring prowess of their ancestors to forge some of the most prosperous maritime, merchant kingdoms in all of pre-colonial Asia. These kingdoms were largely concentrated on the islands of Sumatra and Java, which served as the gateway to the most important shipping lane in the world, the Malacca Strait. Since ancient times, the Malacca Strait has been the central nexus of the maritime Silk Road, which connected the celestial empire of China to the ancient civilizations of India, Persia, Arabia, and beyond. By mastering the shipping lanes that connected in numerous extremely wealthy empires across Asia, the rulers of Java and Sumatra became extremely wealthy themselves. As the monsoon winds blew foreign traders onto Nusantara's shores, so too did they blow in foreign philosophies, sciences, political principles, and religions. While the Austronesians were originally an animist people, constant contact with the civilizations of India saw them slowly adopt Hinduism and Buddhism as their two main faiths. By the 8th century AD, the rulers of kingdoms like Mataram and Srivijaya had become fully Indianized, with their kings portraying themselves as avatars of Hindu gods like Vishnu and Shiva, and styling themselves as Devaraja, an ancient Sanskrit word meaning God-king. Grand monuments were consecrated to glorify their divinely mandated reigns, such as Borobudur, which to this day remains the largest Buddhist structure in the world, and Prambanan, the second largest Hindu temple in Southeast Asia. If India was the place from which the kings of Nusantara received their spiritual legitimacy, then China was the place where they received their political legitimacy. It was an ancient custom that foreign kingdoms wishing to do commerce with China had to swear nominal fealty to the Chinese emperor, something that Nusantara's Hindu-Buddhist kings played along with in order to gain access to Chinese riches. Throughout the medieval era, successful rulers in Sumatra and Java often underlined their entitlement to rule by demonstrating China's approval. The zenith of Nusantara's Hindu-Buddhist era was marked by the rise of the Majapahit, a massive seafaring empire which emerged out of the chaos of the Mongol invasion of Java in the 14th century and united the vast majority of the archipelago under its rule. However, as the Majapahit rose in prominence, so too did an alternative religion began growing exponentially in popularity, challenging the divine authority of the empire's Hindu god kings. This new faith came in the form of melodious muezzin, proclaiming the call of prayer from the peaks of minarets. Origins of Islam in Nusantara. The origins of Islam lie a world away from tropical Nusantara, in the arid sand dunes of Arabia. There, in the 7th century CE, a caravan merchant received a vision from God and changed the world forever. Within 2 generations, the successors of the Prophet Muhammad had stormed out of the Arabian Peninsula in one of the fastest and most successful conquest sprees in world history, forging a caliphate that spanned from Iberia in the west to the Indus in the east. As the Islamic Caliphate was now the dominant power of Middle Eurasia, it now controlled the ports which made up the western end of the maritime Silk Road. From those ports, Muslim merchants from Persia and Arabia set forth along the same routes their ancestors had for centuries, blowing eastward along monsoon winds in search of silk, porcelain, and spice. As the winds of commerce carried these entrepreneurs further than the armies of the Caliphate had ever tread, it also pollinated their faith along the trade routes they followed, with communities of foreign Muslim merchants sprouting up in coastal areas throughout Southeast and East Asia, including Sumatra, Java, and even China. Indeed, by the time of China's Middle Tang dynasty in the 8th and 9th centuries AD, sizable Muslim communities had developed in the thriving port cities of the southern province of Guangzhou. As China had long exerted heavy political influence upon the kings of Nusantara, the Chinese Muslim community would later play a big role in introducing Islam to the region. By the 10th century AD, the economic influence that Muslim traders enjoyed on the maritime Silk Road had increased exponentially, to the point where local rulers began converting to their religion. The first known ruler in Nusantara to embrace the faith of Mecca was an Assamese king in the late 13th century named Merasilu, who ruled over an enigmatic state known as the Samudera Pasai Sultanate on the northern tip of Sumatra. Very little is known about this medieval ruler. However, his status as the first Muslim ruler in Nusantara is supported by a certain Italian adventurer named Marco Polo, who visited the northern Sumatran port city of Perlac in 1292. Among the many colorful anecdotes in his travelogue, which make mention of cannibals in the hills and native men with monkey tails, Polo remarks that the locals of Perlac, who used to be Hindus, had recently converted to Islam. Rise of the Malacca Sultanate. While the Samudera Pasai Sultanate was probably the first Muslim state in Nusantara, it was far from the last. The tipping point when Islam began to outpace Hinduism and Buddhism as the dominant religion in the archipelago occurred in the early 15th century, with the founding of the Sultanate of Malacca. In the year 1389, the mighty Majapahit Empire was entering its twilight years. Its greatest king, Hayam Wuruk, had passed away after a marathon 49-year reign, and in the wake of his death, many vassal rulers in Nusantara's outlying island now sought to break free of their Javanese overlords. One of these rulers was Parameswara, the Hindu Raja of Singapore, a precursor to the modern city-state of Singapore. Upon Hayam Wuruk's death, Parameswara repudiated his vassalage to the Majapahit throne. In response, Majapahit forces invaded Parameswara's lands and drove him from his city. Forced into exile, Parameswara fled north to the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. There, according to traditional accounts, he converted to Islam, took on the Persian name of Sri Iskandar Shah, and established the Sultanate of Malacca. A fledgling state surrounded by larger, more established neighbors, the Sultanate of Malacca might have been snuffed out in the crib by its larger neighbors, if not for the unlikely support it received from the Dragon Throne. At the turn of the 15th century, Emperor Yongle of Ming decided that the whole world needed to be reminded about how awesome China was. Traditionally, this was done by inviting dignitaries from outlying nations to the imperial capital where they would pay tribute to the Son of Heaven and receive lavish gifts to bring back to their homelands in return. However, Yongle's ambition demanded that he showcase China's glory on a global scale, which he did by commissioning the treasure voyages of the famed Admiral Zheng He, a Chinese Muslim eunuch who commanded a fleet of giant treasure junks and sailed to foreign lands bearing exotic gifts and an invitation to swear fealty to the Ming dynasty. According to the Malay annals, Zenghi arrived at Malacca in 1405 and formally invited Sri Iskandar Shah to China. The Sultan accepted, journeying to the Dragon Throne to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Ming dynasty. This established an invaluable political connection with the mighty Ming dynasty that would ensure Malacca's survival and earn it vast fortunes in trade revenue from Chinese merchants who began calling at its port in ever-increasing numbers. Politically secure, Malacca grew at an exponential rate thanks to its advantageous position at the bottleneck of the Malacca Strait. The population of its capital city exploded as Malay, Indian, Chinese, Persian, Arab, and even European merchants flocked to its ports, eager to cash in on the wealth generated by the city's advantageous position at the nexus of the maritime Silk Road. By the 1430s, Malacca's sultans had grown wealthy enough to expand their political hegemony, sending their fleets to conquer neighboring kingdoms and establish tributary states, beginning with the island of Sumatra, then stretching to the southern reaches of the Thai Peninsula, to the Riau archipelago and beyond. By the mid-15th century, Malacca had succeeded in establishing itself as the hegemonic power in Nusantara and a worthy rival to the crumbling Majapahit Empire. To be continued in Part 2.